Hello everyone, and welcome to this video, which is in our Great Engine Middlegames series. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler, and we are taking a look at game 86 from the TCEC Season 24 SuperFinal, Stockfish White against AlphaZero as Black. Quite excited about this video, really. I think it's quite unusual and not content that you'd find anywhere else on the internet. We'll just have to see whether as many viewers like it as I do, but I think it's very, very interesting. So this was the position after a rather dodgy Sicilian had been given to Leela to defend. Leela had been suffering a little bit, grabbed a b pawn, but also put its king on the queen side. So there was a lot of pressure building up against the black king here. Leela made a breakout here and played the move e4, takes, and bishop d4. So sacrificing a pawn, kind of ruining the black structure here, but at least activating the dark squared bishop. And here Stockfish took a very interesting decision. After this decision, Stockfish's evaluation went really super high. So it was at plus 2.3, which with the new Stockfish, the new adjusted scale of evaluation is, really just completely winning for White. Played the move knight b5 check. And after takes, obviously we're opening the A file. There's some serious danger for the black king here. Leela played knight b4. Stockfish threw in a little b6 check. King a6, just sidestepping, not taking the pawn on b6 because of the pin on the b file. And then Stockfish sacrificed the exchange. Rook b4, queen d4, queen takes b6, queen d2. And then Leela brought the rook over to cover the A file and played rook a5. And here, Stockfish was evaluating the position as plus 2.3, plus 2.5, something like that. And, if you're just looking at the evaluations, the evaluation bar, then you just sort of say game over. But yeah, I have to say I was rather fascinated by this position that Stockfish had steered from afar to consolidate its advantage. I mean, first of all, just from a human perspective, the path to this position hadn't really been that smooth, really. Because, in this position, for example, after queen takes d4, queen b6, White had to make a bit of a useless a retreating move, queen d2, just to avoid the exchange of queens, because obviously the exchange of queens would just give black an exchange up position for no compensation at all. And secondly, bearing in mind that in material terms, White's a knight for a rook down, so got this knight on e3, but Black's got this extra rook. Then that's in terms of simple numbers, that's -2 pawns. White's most obvious compensation for that sacrifice exchange is the rather fraught position of the black king and the super safe position of the white king. The black king is long-term unsafer. That king, first of all, the A file has got no pawn cover, so black's always going to need some pieces to cover the king. And also, if the black king wanders onto the B file, white's still got this potential pressure along the B file against B7. The C file, again, the black king hasn't got any real pawn cover. So, long term, you don't really see the black king finding ever a safe position. You look at the white king, on the other hand, 3 pawns around it, and you sort of say, well, that white king is going to be pretty safe forever. So, that's definitely, a long-term advantage that that White has got, something that Black's never going to be able to repair completely. But is that one dynamic factor, that long-term weakness of the Black King, really equivalent to 4.5 pawns? Because you've got to get past the material disadvantage, that's 2 pawns, and then you've got to get up to Stockfish's evaluation, which is 2.5. That seemed, to me to be a little bit excessive. So if that isn't the only advantage, well, what is white's other advantage? And what's the relative scale? How much is this dynamic advantage, the fact that the black king is weak, how much is that contributing to the advantage? And what is that other mysterious factor that seems to be giving white a +2 or 2.5 advantage? Well, funnily enough, during the week I attended a dinner. And I sat next to Michael Adams. I'm sure you know who he is, but that's England's #1 since time immemorial, and really super class player. And I asked him about his opinion of the position. Yeah, I'm a great dinner companion to have next to you. Poor Mickey, But I asked him about it. I said, did completely winning evaluation, did that seem, what were your thoughts about that? And Mickey's reaction was really, really interesting, as always. I always love asking him stuff about positions. And first of all, he seemed to believe the evaluation in general. He could believe it, that this one might be assessed as completely winning for white. The first line that he looked at was that he just mentioned was this one: H4, Rook A1 check, and Queen B1, and he was sort of wondering about that. What happens after that? Which I thought was very interesting. Clearly, Mickey was trying to achieve something with black before white got settled. That was really his feeling, that black had to try and achieve something, or if white got settled, then this would be very dangerous long term for black. The other thing Mickey said was just in his little always slightly casual way. He said he also mentioned that this H6 pawn was really weak, and he said, you could imagine that one dropping off, and then this H pawn running on the king side, and black would be a little bit stretched, dealing both with the long-term threats against black's king on the queen side, and also trying to deal with the rook's pawn. This was just 30 seconds whilst Mickey was busy eating his lovely dinner, and also drinking some wine as well. So it's sort of I don't think I had Mickey's complete and full undivided attention when he said that. But it does go to show really that elite players are not as accurate, of course, as engines, but you can still get superhuman judgments from them, because what Mickey said was absolutely on the money. It was really 100% correct, because in actual fact, that black king, that weakness of the black king, that is a long-term problem. That's always going to be there. The white king is super safe indeed. Black, Rook A1 check, Queen B1, the line that Mickey suggested. It might not be the best line at all, but definitely it's black's most obvious attempt to make something of his position before white consolidates. And indeed, the big factor that turns this position into +2.5 is this pawn on H6. And the scenario that Mickey described, white winning the pawn on H6 and then running the H pawn up, and black being too stretched on both sides, that is indeed the magic scenario that makes this position so promising for white, despite being the exchange down. Now, we will examine all of those scenarios in turn. Don't worry about that, just to make it concrete. And then, at the very end, I'll show you what happened in the game, because it won't make any sense to you unless you've seen the other things. Certainly didn't to me, anyway. That judgment from Mickey, which corresponded with my own. On the other hand, I'd actually analysed this position already, so basically Mickey's judgment in 30 seconds was equal to all that work from me. But I got quite interested in the position. How important was that pawn on H6? And what I actually did was quite nice. I spent a lot of time just trying out different sort of structures for black. So I tried putting this pawn on H7 on G7 or on G6. I put put the pawns on F7 and E7. I put the pawns on E7 and F6. And basically, if I repaired this structure, took away this isolated H pawn, and put it on g6, or put the pawns on e7 f6, e7 f7, then basically white's the position was evaluated by the engine to something like 0.00 to 0.30. So basically what the engines were saying was that, this whole dynamic construction where the black king is weak and needs some black pieces all the time to cover it, that's sort of worth about 2 points. That's full compensation for the exchange. But repair this pawn structure, make it less vulnerable, and you're barely, white's barely better. So this is really, this fact that this pawn is weak, it's that's really worth about 2 or 2.5 pawns in terms of evaluation. And it gets even scarier than that in actual fact, because I also tried positions where this pawn was on h7 or the pawn was on h5. And do you know, when the pawn's on h7, Stockfish was giving it about a 0.5 evaluation, so a little bit better for white than the other structural permutations, but not that great. Pawn on h5 was about 0.7, but not that important. So actually, the fact that this pawn is on h6 in this position, that is the key point to giving white a 2.5 point advantage. And it's not that the pawn is on h7 or h5, that's not at all the same. It's that the pawn is on h6. So why is that? Well, the reason for that is very interesting. We're going to get into that a little bit later. Just in general, what you have to say is that black has one key defensive setup in this position, just one, to try and hold the position. And well, it's just very, very important that whilst black is setting up that defensive structure, which is very difficult to do, that the pawn on h6 should not be hanging. If the pawn on h6 is not hanging, then you manage to get to that defensive structure without losing a pawn straight away, and your chances of holding are decent. If you lose the h-pawn on the way, then you've got no holding chances at all. So let's have a little look now at a few of the things that we've discussed. It's a very long introduction. I hope that wasn't too boring or confusing for you, but I just want to really get it across just how complicated and interesting this position is. What I will say about it is that the actual evaluation of this position with this pawn on h6 is not in doubt. I ran 20 very long time control games between Stockfish and Dragon, and they scored 20 white wins out of 20. So there's really no possibility for black to hold this position with the pawn on h6. With the pawn on h7 or h5 or in other positions, it was 20 draws out of 20. So can you imagine? So h4 played, and this is a multi-purpose move in actual fact. Obviously it's giving the king some safety, just sort of really emphasizing the difference between this king and this king, and also of course, well, we've talked about the scenario where this h-pawn runs up the board. Well, just getting a start on that already. Now, the line that Mickey suggested, rook a1, king h2, queen b1, that's one of the first things I looked at. Also worth mentioning here that don't think for an instant that Mickey thought that that was the best line. He's not suggesting it as the best line for black, and that when it turns out not to be, that we, laugh at the GM who knows nothing. The point is, it's a way of approaching and analysing positions that was first actually consciously explained to me in our book Chess for Life. Natasha Regan and I interviewed John Spielman, and he said, asked John, well, how do you come up with moves in positions? And he said that essentially he's relying on his intuition, and he has a very strong feeling about, if this position is good for me, then this is the move I have to play. If it works, then great. If not, then it's clear that my position is not good, and I'm going to need to find something extraordinary or unusual in order to make it work or hold it or whatever. So when a GM suggests a move or a continuation like this, it's very often not the best move. It maybe doesn't think that it's the best move or whatever, but it's really the move that black has to play in order for this position to be okay for black. And if that move doesn't work, then black obviously has got some problems. And it's a very, very powerful shortcut way of zooming into the essential of the position and really trying to get a really settled, solid, positive feeling about your evaluation of the position. Now here, what is black doing here? I mean, actually what black's doing with these two moves, rook a1, queen b1, trying to get in queen g1 checkmate, trying to show in actual fact that this king is not safer than this king on a6. And if that's the case, then of course, this whole exchange sacrifice from white doesn't make any sense. But actually looks like quite a dangerous threat. But this move, bishop f1, is white's only move, but actually a very, very strong move indeed. We're threatening c5 check, we're threatening queen takes d6, we're also threatening rook b2 followed by something like queen b4 or queen d4 or queen d6, getting at the black king, and the engines just say yeah, this is completely finished, no point in playing. So for example, after king a7, then rook b2, queen e1, rook a2 check is really nasty. Something like king b6, what are we going to do? Oh, queen d6 is checkmate even, actually. So there we are. I mean, that's just that's just completely over for black. So what that means is that what Mickey's litmus test about does black have any good long-term chances here doesn't work. So that's basically reinforcing your opinion that white's got some pretty good long-term chances. Now, Mickey's scenario that he mentioned, white wins the h-pawn and then pushes his own h-pawn, and black can't cope with the pressure on both sides. I'm just going to show you a few examples of that. And I think it's very important to understand that, because unless you understand this, you won't understand what on earth the engines were doing later on in the game. This is how actually the game proceeded, Stockfish against Leela. Queen c5, king h2. I mean, actually, these moves h4, king h2, unbelievably calm in this position. It was something that we first noticed actually with the games of AlphaZero, when Natasha and I wrote about those. We said that often AlphaZero in these seeming positions where it had sacrificed material and you thought surely it's going to launch everything now at the opponent's king, just took a couple of moves out to make its own king safe from any random checks before proceeding with the attack. And this is exactly what Stockfish is doing. It just goes to show, since those heady days, 2017-18, engines, just been transformed basically. It's amazing how strong they are. So, king a7 was played by Leela, knight d5. And as we're going to see, it might interest you that we're going to see this in a few moves, that these sort of exchanges where white gets this powerful bishop on d5, these are the bases that are absolutely winning for white. I'd understand, for myself that they're very good, absolutely winning. I wouldn't really dare ever say that, but the engines, it's pretty clear. So Leela played rook a4, rook a2, rook a6, so just a little shimmy there, and then rook b2, and now h5, just to avoid the pawn being captured. By the way, queen c4, rook c2 is very, very unpleasant, because now we're going to get a check and a check when the king retreats to a8. So for example, queen b3, we go queen d4 check now. If king a8, then knight c7 is mate, taking the c-pawn allowed this knight to get supported on c7. And b6 is met by the extraordinarily unpleasant knight b4 when we've got rook c7, knight c6 check coming in. I mean, awful, total carnage. So h5 and now bishop f1 from the engines, just protecting c4 and actually preparing rook b5, chasing the queen away, and then we'll be able to play queen d4, and it's getting quite fraught. So this was one of the engine games. Leela took on d5, as we'll see later. But my engines also, well, I made them play, I think, queen a5, knight c3, king a8, rook b5, and now let's have a look at queen not queen a1 first of all, but queen c7. Knight d5 takes and rook takes. And this is a very important position to understand, because white is still the exchange down, of course, and you could sort of say, well, there's no immediate mate, how bad can it be? But for the engines, this is completely winning. We're at +3, +4, and the big problem for black, it's the scenario that Mickey sketched out, that white is going to win this pawn. There's nothing you can do about that, and then we're just going to line up on the old B7 pawn. Possibly also on the F7 pawn, maybe by putting something on the F file, and we're just going to tie black down to the defense. I mean, black's got to do something, if we're attacking something on the 7th rank, because it's too close to the opponent's king there. So black's going to be tied down, and then we're just going to start moving our kingside pawns up. And black's just curiously powerless. Again, if you're talking about scenarios, that really is the archetypal AlphaZero Stockfish 8 scenario, and you're seeing it 6 years later. You see Stockfish doing that to Leela somehow. It's quite nice, really. But I'll just show you reasonably quickly just how this went. So Stockfish decided to put the rook on f4. Very nice square, actually. I mean, you maybe remember from the Polishing the Classic series, we talk about anchoring your pieces, and a rook in a rook ending, defending both a pawn sideways and also backwards, the pawn next to the king. And this is again the same thing, and in actual fact this rook is also attacking a pawn on f7 as well. So what we do, we just get our bishop onto g2, bishop onto d5, so that's a great square for it, covering the white king side, and also attacking the pawn on b7. Rook e5, queen b1, so we're lining up nicely. Queen c8, rook f3, very nice move. Now this rook is attacking f5, it's defending f2, and it's also ready to swing over to b3, or even to a3. I mean, the invasion along the a file is something that black, has got to think about. Again, you're noticing it's just that long-term component to it. Black's got limited cover in front of the king, so you're never free of that, of that pressure. Rook c7, king g2, Stockfish taking its time, queen d4 again, rook b3, now the rook swinging over, queen c5, queen d3, rook b5, keeping everything solid, and now the pawn starts to move. And you're starting to feel you're a little bit stretched. I mean, this rook is defending the d pawn and also the b pawn. It doesn't want to start moving away from here. This queen is defending the b pawn, also covering the a file. Again, you don't particularly want to start moving away too far. Well, Leela tries it a little bit. Queen d4, we're just squeezing in. Maybe looking at rook b6, maybe even looking for something like queen h4 into f6, which would be very nasty as well. Queen a3, rook b5, and now f4 oh, this was Stockfish defending it as black, just hitting the pawn on h5, but white goes g4, queen c1, bishop f3, and again you see this bishop is really covering so much of the king. I mean, even if you get a rook e1 to check, I just go round to h2, and the bishop is covering the h1 square. So the white king is unbelievably safe here. So king c8, h6, queen e1, g5, and it's just all rolling really. And rook e8, queen e7, rook c7, h7, takes, and pretty clear this was just going to be a complete win. Just show you the last couple of moves, g6, and that's goodbye. Bishop e4, and g7 is happening. So I mean, that was that was one scenario where you get this this exchange down position for white, but you're winning the h pawn, and then you're stretching black completely. Let me show you another, just to show that it's not just one position. Queen d8 was another thing. This one was quite funny actually. Bishop g2, bishop c4. So white even gives away that c4 pawn. Rook b4, d5, knight d5. Black gives back something. And again, we get into this sort of situation where white's the exchange down, but it's got this massive bishop. It's tying down some of the black pieces to the defense of the black king, and well, these pawns are definitely vulnerable. And all we need to do is to pick up this pawn on h5, and then start running the h pawn, and black's pieces are going to be terribly stretched. And this was how this was how it happened. Could have taken on h5 immediately. I think this was Stockfish just taking its time. Bishop f3, it knows that the pawn is going to be going all the time. Rook takes h5, and again rook f5. We're leaning against this one, we've got pressure against this one as well, and now this h pawn is going to start running. And again, you know, it just there's just not very much that black can do about this. You know, black's trying, you know, to knock the white pieces away from good positions, but you can't do it all the time. And now the pawn starts to move. We reform. We again attack the pawn on b7, and then we start hitting the black pieces a little bit. Queen e1, and now the pawn moves on to h6. And you know, again, lots and lots of threats here. And you know, a nice thing here, Queen a5. Again, you're seeing this this long-term problem. There's no pawn cover for black on the a file, so that means that that the white pieces always have the possibility to invade. And here, you know, you're giving up the h pawn, but that wouldn't particularly matter, because at the very least we've got this picking up the queen. So King b8 played, Queen a3. I mean. Always lovely tactics, right? Queen f8 check. Queen d2, Queen b3, lining up on b7 again. Queen d7, Rook b6. We're just laterally now defending the pawn on h6 and still attacking the pawn on b7. And yeah, what was it? Dragon played f6, Rook f6. But now, you know, the material situation is huge in our favour. And again, you're going to get a very similar scenario here. So here actually Stockfish just exchanging off the rooks. It's going to be happy to exchange off the queens, and now the pawns start to roll, and well, you know, doesn't really matter. Yeah, Stockfish playing around a little bit, and g7, and there we are. You've completely won the game as well. So just two examples. I've got many more. It's not an isolated occurrence, this. But just to give you that idea, that scenario that Mickey sketched out just in his 30 seconds of half attention, you know, we can look to win the h pawn, and then get this type of position with black's pieces tied down to defend the pawn, long-term problems with the king, and this h pawn running up and just distracting the black pieces too much. Yeah, this is the core scenario for this position. Now, you know, one thing that I haven't you know, explained thoroughly is, and that we're going to start looking at now, is, you know, I mentioned that the pawn has to be on h6 for white to have a 2.5 evaluation. If the pawn's on h7 or the pawn's on h5, then it doesn't, you know, it's not the same at all. And yeah, made me, you know, I kept on talking with Mickey. I didn't only show him this position during the dinner, but Mickey, we were talking about, you know, analysing with engines and analysing middle games or whatever. And Mickey said that in his normal dry, funny way, that he said that you know, often what engines say when you analyse with them, it's often not very useful. But unfortunately, you can't ignore it either. So you end up not really knowing what to do. And well, actually, this position really made me think of that, because, you know, you've got you say the position with a pawn on h7 or a pawn on h5 is about, you know, 0.5, 0.7 for white. You know, but the pawn on h6 is 2.5, and you know, is that really, you know, useful to know? In a way, not really. I mean, I would if I was using this, you know, for a practical game, or, you know, to hone my evaluation, I'd want to know that in general, what I'd want to know is that, you know, this dynamic advantage, the king exposed long term, black needing to keep some pieces around it to defend it, that's worth an exchange. That would be what I would want to know. But yeah, you know, the fact that having the pawn on h6 is 2.6, and if the pawn's on h7 or h5 is much lower, not winning according to the engine, that's something, you know, that I don't really know how useful that is, because it's so specific to the position. But I was still, you know, I still wanted to try and understand, you know, why was this actually the case. You know, I understand, of course, that the h pawn will be hanging in some variations, but on the other hand, you know, black can also take a move out to defend it with h5. You know, what is the actual problem there? Well, it's actually very interesting, because what the actual point of it all is that the engines think that as these positions proceed, black has actually just got one method of defense, just one method of defense that would somehow enable black to counter that long-term pressure and survive. And that is the transfer of this bishop d7 to c6. So if this bishop goes d7 to c6, and it's certainly not stupid, you get the point of it straight away. We are well, not neutralizing, but at least stemming the power of white's pressure along the h1 a8 diagonal, and that means that certainly black's rook on b8 becomes a little bit freer to join in some sort of activity, instead of being tied down to defending the pawn on b7. And basically, if black manages to achieve this bishop d7 to c6 without losing the h-pawn, then black has a good chance of being absolutely fine. But the big problem is that this moment is virtually the only moment when the engines think black can play bishop d7 relatively safely. But of course, just at this moment, white's taking the pawn on h6 in this line. And well, to be honest, I think this is a better attempt for black, because we get some sort of position here where white's got a knight instead of the bishop, and I would say that that these sort of positions where white's got a knight, they're much more difficult to handle for white than positions where you've got the bishop. For example, we're already threatening queen h1 check or rook h1, and well, there's one very important move that you have to see, which is rook b1 in order to deal with this, because after rook b1 there's queen a5 checkmate. But I would say in general that this is, in any case, would be black's best defensive approach, to try and bring the bishop d7 to c6. But of course, the big difference is that if this pawn is on h7 or h5, this h-pawn is not hanging. So you play bishop d7, the h-pawn isn't hanging, so you get it to c6. And white's chances of holding on to black's chances of holding on to this position are just way better. And in actual fact, all of the engine games I was playing were ending in draws when I played this position with the pawn h7, pawn h5. All of the engines wanted to play bishop d7 to c6, and all of them were achieving draws. Not comfortable draws, but draws all the same. So what can we deduce from that? We can simply deduce that, in this position, as Mickey pointed out, white is a reasonable amount better. He's the exchange down, but the weakness of the black king gives him full compensation for the exchange. The presence of this weak h-pawn on h6 or even h7, h5 gives white an extra advantage, because it gives white the possibility of winning the h-pawn and then afterwards pushing his own h-pawn to queen, and whilst his own king remains completely safe, in huge contrast to the black king, which is permanently unsafe. But the key reason why it's 2.5 rather than just a slight advantage for white, or something approaching a clear advantage, is because black has one key defense, just one key defensive idea, to bring the bishop round d7 to c6, and well, when the pawn is hanging on h6 to the queen on d2, that idea just doesn't work. If the pawn's not hanging, if it's on h7 or h5, then black just has enough time to achieve it. And again, maybe one important thing, why can't black, for example, after h4 play bishop d7 immediately? The key thing is that this is what Leela was preparing, with all sorts of moves that you don't really realize at the start. Leela was preparing to try and play this bishop d7 idea, but you can't play it immediately, because, for example, here you get hit by c5, and if you go rook takes c5, bishop f1 check is really embarrassing, because after bishop b5, rook a2, then the black king has got completely caught in the corner. Again, that long-term advantage that there's no pawn covering on the a file, and just with this c5 and bishop f1 idea, you're managing to break the black coordination, drag the rook away from the a file, and stop it from coming back. So all of these moves that that you didn't quite understand with Leela, king a7, just getting the king safe. All of those moves were done to make bishop d7 possible. Because, for example, it's a lot more subtle here, but after bishop d7, knight d5, then bishop c6 is absolutely impossible. We go knight b4 check here, and if king a7, I've got bishop takes c6. If takes, there's knight takes c6 check, which is just completely winning for white. If you go to b6, I go rook b2, king c7, knight d5 check. You have to take off, and we've got our winning position type again. With this strong bishop, the pressure along the b file, and well, these pawns very weak. And then on top of it all, you've got your king on c7, where, well, white gets extra possibilities of coming in here, and then the king's in trouble as well. So, so this move bishop d7 isn't possible. This is why Leela was making all these preparatory moves, just trying to get its king position safe so that it could play bishop d7. And then h5 is again kind of the move, hoping to repair bishop b7 just to be able to by putting the h pawn not en prise. It's quite it's quite amazing, but it really makes you realize how deep some of the stuff is that the that the engines do, because just simply incredible. And I think I have to point out one more as well, because it's a very common idea. After bishop d7, knight d5, well, we know that bishop c6 doesn't work, but could you just play king a7? Just avoiding that knight b4 trick. And here white's got an incredible move. Queen h6 is not terrible, but it does allow black to play b5. There's no queen d2 takes a5, and also the rook is pinned. So sort of b4 and b3 is coming in. Black's going to get some counterplay here, but the engines point out this move, which is beautiful. Knight f6, and the key point is bishop c6. I just take on here, and well, queen c6 allows queen a5, and bc6 allows knight d7, which is very, very embarrassing indeed. So basically after knight f6 you have to do something like rook d8, rook b2, bishop c8. We're not getting what we wanted. Knight d5, and then we're going to grab this pawn on h6. You won't be able to stop me, and then we'll come back after, and we'll push our h-pawn, and the standard scenario applies. So with all that in mind, let's have a look at what how the game actually went, and you'll sort of see, I hope you'll understand now a lot better what was happening. So h4, queen c5, king h2, king a7, knight d5, rook a4, rook a2, rook a6, rook b2, h5, and now bishop f1. And here Leela played bishop d5, and after rook b5 played the move bishop e4. And it's a bit mysterious really. Why would you give up your queen? Why wouldn't you play queen c7? Well, after queen c7, queen d5, we know this position. This position is just winning for white. White's going to take the pawn. He's going to bring the bishop round g2 to d5, and then the pawn's going to get pushed. We know that scenario, and the engines know it too. So that's why Leela, and also Komodo in my games as well, and I think also Stockfish as well, they were just saying, okay, well, let's try and play this position. But this position's really ropey for black. I mean, first of all, you've got a lot of weak pawns, and that's always great for a queen. And secondly, the black king is open, and essentially any positions where you've got weak pawns and an open opponent's king, the queen is always going to be much stronger than the two rooks. Well, also add in a rather safe white king to the mixture, because you often don't realize it, but those checks are used very heavily to replace the queen with gain of tempo to better positions, new angles and attack and all that. If you haven't got those checks, then the queen is much slower. If you've got those checks, then the queen is much faster than the two rooks, always. And well, that's what Stockfish just really proved, really. Bishop f5, rook c5, queen f6, got some checks, and just kept on checking all the time, and making stuff happen basically. And then actually this was quite nice. The white king just moved up the board, and with the h pawn, and somehow black never got the b pawn going. Its own king kept on getting in the way, and white's pawns just kept on marching, and well, those queened quite quickly. Well, Leela committed suicide, there we are, and Stockfish won. So there we are. I hope you enjoyed this video. I mean, I do think it sort of says some fundamental things actually about, you know, what strong human players see, and what engines see, and, you know, the areas in which, you know, engines can be really useful and not useful, and then also the type of investigation that it's really important to do when you don't thoroughly understand why an engine is evaluating a position as it is. I mean, you know, just in general, you know, I do think that you know, elite human players are capable of you know, superhuman judgments. You know, I mean, judgments that engines might you know, might give too. I think, you know, elite players are, you know, are really capable of those. So yeah, you know, that is definitely true. But I think, you know, what we're always focused on as human players is generalizations, because, you know, this specific position is worth 2.5 is actually of no interest whatsoever. The generalized topic that you know, this week king with exposed is just worth an exchange, that is a very important generalization, because you could use that in a completely different position by analogy to help, you know, guide your course of action. Also knowing that this scenario that, you know, with this pawn being weak and attackable, not on g6 for example, part of a pawn chain, but loose, that actually ups your advantage. That again is a very important generalization to know. But again, knowing that with a pawn on h6 specifically you'd have a winning position, that's again of limited interest somehow. I mean, it's very interesting to see it, but of limited interest to remember, because the next position that you see, you know, that you where you're you know, you're choosing a course of action based on analogy with, for example, this position, yeah, there'll be completely different details which are, you know, not which will require completely different calculation. But what I did think that I'd really want to learn is, you know, when I looked at the position, I mean, what I thought was kind of similar to Mickey, and but what never occurred to me was black's best defensive option. And I really thought that you know, that wouldn't that be an amazing thing if not only did you understand all the attacking facets of the position intuitively, but also intuitively that you saw the correct defense, bishop to d7 c6, just in that same flash of understanding. Because I think that would really, you know, that really means an extra 50, 60, whatever, 100 ELO points on your rating. And well, that was the thing that I only really understood when I started digging into, well, why does the engine think this position's so good, and the position with the pawns on h7 and h5 are not so good. And that, you know, that was really I think that's the one generalization that I took away from this position, from what I did with the engines, you know, which was yeah, that extra defensive resource. And wouldn't that be amazing if you know, if you could think of that straight away right off the bat looking at the position. To be honest, there's no real reason why you wouldn't be able to do that. It's not a complicated maneuver, but yeah, it just needs some yeah, you just need to yeah, to think about it and try and stimulate to think just a little bit further. So not just attacking possibilities, but also defensive possibilities as well. Yeah, whether that's you know, whether that's useful in terms of, you know, taking the decision to sacrifice the exchange, you know, early on, I'm not 100% sure. I mean, you know, the funny thing is that in this position, one of the games that I ran on my hardware, it's quite good hardware, right? It's not that far behind the TCEC. You know, 96 threads or 94 threads I run it at. You know, long time controls as well. But in one of the games, Stockfish didn't play this sacrifice knight b5. It played knight cd5 and then beat dragon, you know, quite comfortably as well. So, you know, it's pretty clear that this position, whether you sacrifice or not, is actually very strong for white. And you know, for human players, you know, speaking for myself, but I think it's quite a common way. You know, deciding whether to play an exchange sacrifice like that is actually a mixture of two things. I mean, first of all, there's the calculating load, which is definitely there. It's not easy, but it is certainly possible. But it's always a question of proportionality. You look at the position, you say, do I need to give up the exchange in this position? Am I overcooking things? I think that this exchange sacrifice is really, really promising. But do I need to do it? Am I overdoing things, or could I just maintain the same advantage but without giving up material? And wouldn't that be a much more sensible thing to do? This is always one of the difficulties in doing this, and certainly I think that if you assess properly that knight cd5 keeps almost as much of your advantage as before. I mean, you just keep the grip on the center. You've got the pressure on the b file, and your queen can start harassing this pawn on h6 as well, and you're very solid. Your kingside solid. I mean, nothing much is going to happen to you. If you assess that properly, why would you go for a move like knight b5 check, and give up the exchange? Proportionality is always a very difficult thing, because it's easy to get carried away, sacrifice the exchange, and then you realize that basically sacrificing the exchange, that's taking a bit more risk. I could have just had a riskless advantage, but you don't always have that possibility in position. Sometimes you really do have to bite the bullet, and that's why it's important to understand positions like this. I hope I also make just a little bit clear about where the difficulty and where the difference between engines and human players often is, because I think people tend to assume that you sort of say, you didn't see this move at all, knight b5, but and people don't quite understand that the justification for this move is not in any of the next 5 or even 10 moves. It's way deeper than that. The justification, the reason why this line was worth playing, and just a little bit better than any other, was in this sub-variation that never even saw the light of day. And that it's really close, because if this pawn's just on one square forward, one square back, then it's not good for not particularly good for white anymore, and wouldn't have been played by any of the engines. So I think that's quite important to sort of understand that the difference between actual the accuracy of the evaluations of elite human players and engines, it's happening at quite a deep level somehow, not at the first move that you see. I think that's also quite important to remember at times before you start criticizing the elite players for what they do or don't see. So there we are. Hope that was interesting and helpful. As I said, I think this is quite unusual stuff. I find it unbelievably interesting. I find it, to be honest, the most fundamental thing that you can look at with engines, to try and understand where the differences in insight and evaluation come up between strong players and engines, and and to understand really what is useful that an engine sees and what is not. Because again, if I was a young player and I had these resources and all that, then I'd definitely be this would be the thing that I would be doing in order to try and improve my game. And I'm older now. I'm not playing very much at all, and probably won't play very much in the future, so it doesn't really bother me too much whether I really improve or not. But certainly I think for younger players or anyone who's serious about improving, amateur whatever level, then this sort of thing, trying to understand why is an engine thinking as it is, and where is the difference with the human player, and what are the what things are generalizable and what things are details. I think that's really important. But if you don't want to do it yourself, then just keep an eye on what I write, for books and Chessable courses, and also what I'm doing here on this channel, because that's basically what I'm doing all the time. So there we are. Hope you enjoyed that. If you liked the video, if you made it to the end, why not give a like, subscribe to the channel, take a look at all my books, There's a new one coming up along, Re-Engineering the Classics, which I wrote together with my childhood coach, Steve Giddins, and I'm very, very excited about that one too. I think it's going to be really, really good. So do keep an eye out for that one. Sample pages available on the New in Chess website. And otherwise, thanks very much for watching, and hope to see you at the next videos. Thanks for watching.